The path to that reckoning, the silent vow Seraphina Vale had made amidst the blinding flashbulbs and the crushing weight of public humiliation, hadn't sprung from that single brutal moment at the courthouse. No, its bitter roots delved far deeper, twisting through years spent within a gilded cage, a prison mistaken by the world, and for a time, by Seraphina herself, as a fairy tale. What a cruel illusion it had all been. Their wedding, a lavish spectacle at the Sterling family's historic Kingfisher Point estate in Rhode Island, had been breathlessly dubbed the event of the decade. Julian Thorne, the self-made titan of Thorne Dominion Capital, his ambition a palpable force, marrying Seraphina Sterling, the luminous heiress to the Sterling Legacy Pharmaceuticals fortune. New money and old, a flawless union on paper, celebrated under a canopy of 1,000 fairy lights and the approving gaze of Aethelburg's elite. But was it truly flawless? Or was it something else entirely? What if the very foundation of this perfect marriage, the one splashed across glossy magazine covers, was in fact a meticulously, almost clinically negotiated contract with love, while love was perhaps merely an elegant, but ultimately insignificant, footnote? Their first encounter had all the hallmarks of a modern fairy tale. The Starlight Foundation Gala, Aethelburg's most glittering charity event. Julian, devastatingly handsome, exuding an aura of raw power and intellect, had seemed to materialize by Seraphina's side as if drawn by an invisible thread. He'd spoken of shared visions, of using their influence for greater good, his dark eyes intense, promising a world she yearned to believe in. Seraphina, then Seraphina Sterling, a young woman with dreams of leveraging her family's immense resources for groundbreaking medical research, had been captivated. He wasn't just another suitor, awed by the Sterling name. He seemed to see her, or so she thought. The courtship that followed was a dizzying whirlwind, a blur of exclusive Aethelburg soirees, private jet jaunts to Seacliff Bluffs, and intimate dinners where Julian's charm was as intoxicating as the vintage wine. Tabloids christened them the Golden Couple, a symbol of dynamism and dynastic promise. And Seraphina, for a while, allowed herself to be swept away by the romance, the sheer momentum of it all. It was easy to believe in the dream when the world was applauding so loudly, wasn't it? Yet, beneath the shimmering surface, a different reality was taking shape. The marriage, blessed with her father Augustus Sterling's quiet but firm approval, was in many ways a strategic alliance of the highest order. A business merger, cloaked in white lace and vows. Augustus, a shrewd patriarch who had built Sterling Corp into a global behemoth, recognized Julian Thorne's ferocious drive. He saw an opportunity. Vital infusions of Sterling capital would fuel Thorne Dominion Capital's aggressive expansion, while Julian's undeniable business acumen could, in turn, safeguard and grow the Sterling philanthropic endeavors that were Seraphina's passion. It sounded so synergistic, so logical. Julian's ambition was a raging fire, consuming everything in its path, and Seraphina initially had admired its intensity. He wanted to build an empire, and she, with her Sterling Legacy Pharmaceuticals, aimed to heal the world. Surely their paths could align? But the early signs, the subtle tremors before the earthquake, began to manifest. Julian, her husband, the man who had spoken of partnership, started to exhibit a chillingly controlling nature. It wasn't overt, not at first. It was couched in concern, in a desire to protect her image, to enhance her impact. He'd suggest which charities deserved her public endorsement, usually those with board members beneficial to Thorne Capital. He'd meticulously review her speeches for philanthropic events, his edits subtly shifting her heartfelt words towards a more corporate, less personal tone. "It's about brand alignment, Sarah," he'd explain, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "Our brand, we need to present a united front to expand our networks." Whose networks, she sometimes wondered? His or theirs? Her own deep-seated responsibilities at Sterling Legacy Pharmaceuticals, particularly a cutting-edge Alzheimer's research project she was personally championing, began to feel like an inconvenience in Julian's meticulously planned life. His demand for her presence at an endless parade of dinners, galas, and networking weekends, all vital, he claimed, for their future, created a constant, grinding friction. "Can't your team handle the lab reports for one evening, Seraphina?" he'd ask, a sliver of impatience in his voice when she tried to beg off an event to review crucial data. "Your presence beside me is invaluable." Invaluable as a scientist or as a beautifully dressed asset? The question hung unspoken in the opulent, sterile air of their Oak Haven estate. The easy laughter, the spontaneous moments of connection that had marked their early days, dwindled, replaced by terse conversations about schedules and obligations. Arguments, when they occurred, weren't passionate explosions. They were cold, calculated exchanges, leaving Seraphina feeling hollowed out and misunderstood. The romantic spark, had it ever truly been there, or was it just a figment of her hopeful imagination? Her mother, Eleanor Sterling, a woman of quiet grace and keen perception, noticed the dimming of Seraphina's light. During a rare, private afternoon tea, Eleanor's gentle hand covered hers. "My dear," she began, her voice laced with a mother's worry, Are you truly happy? That fire, that passion I always saw in your eyes when you spoke of your research, it seems," muted Seraphina. Seraphina forced a smile, the weight of her father's declining health and his unspoken wish for this marriage to succeed pressing down on her. Augustus had been so pleased with the union. "I'm fine, Mother. Julian is very supportive. It's just a demanding life. A lie. A polite, dutiful lie." Her only true confidant was her cousin, Clara Vance. Clara, with her sharp wit and even sharper eyes, was never fooled by societal veneers. She was fiercely protective of Seraphina, her loyalty a bedrock in Seraphina's increasingly unstable world. During hushed late-night calls, Seraphina would pour out her heart, her voice barely a whisper. "He hardly listens anymore, Clara. We used to talk for hours about everything, about building a better world, funding research that could actually change lives. Now all he talks about are expansions, buyouts, market share. He's obsessed." Clara, never one to mince words, would listen, her silence more understanding than any platitude. "He talks about synergy and market penetration when you describe a potential breakthrough in neurodegenerative disease, Sarah. Does he even hear the words you're saying? Or just the potential for a press release?" Clara's observations were like small, sharp cuts. "Men like Julian Thorne don't just happen to meet women like you, heiresses to Sterling Corp. There's always an angle, always a calculation. Just be damn sure you know what his is before it's too late to see it clearly. Maybe a romantic trip? Couples therapy?" Clara had once suggested, a hopeful lilt in her voice. Seraphina had just shaken her head, a bitter laugh escaping her. "Julian? Therapy?" He'd see it as a hostile takeover of his meticulously optimized schedule, a sign of weakness. And weakness, Clara, is something Julian Thorne despises above all else. The distance between them yawned into a chasm. Seraphina felt herself drifting, overshadowed by Julian's relentless ambition, by his ever-expanding public persona. She became the wife of Julian Thorne, her own identity, her own considerable achievements in the world of medical philanthropy, fading into the background. She was a beautiful, polished fixture in the gilded cage he had constructed around them. A cage many envied, but a cage nonetheless. Was this her life now? A series of curated appearances and stifled dreams. And what of Augustus Sterling, the patriarch? He was a man of few words but immense foresight, known for his meticulous planning in every aspect of Sterling Corp and his life. Seraphina began to recall with a new, unsettling clarity certain moments. Her father, during strained family dinners at Kingfisher Point, observing Julian with a quiet, unreadable intensity as his son-in-law pontificated about some ruthless corporate conquest. A slight narrowing of Augustus's eyes, a thoughtful stroking of his chin. Nothing overt, but a hint of something. Skepticism? Evaluation? Then there was his private study, a room off-limits to most, a sanctuary filled with heavy mahogany, leather-bound ledgers, and an imposing antique safe whose combination was known only to him. A room Seraphina had rarely entered, but which, in her memory, always seemed to hum with unspoken secrets, with the weight of a legacy carefully guarded. She imagined him in there after those dinners, making cryptic notes in one of his many journals, his thoughts on Julian Thorne locked away like the valuable papers in his safe. What had her father truly thought of the man he'd allowed his beloved daughter to marry? What secrets lay buried in that silent, imposing room? Seraphina clutched a worn photograph from their first anniversary, taken at a sun-drenched villa in Tuscany. Julian's arm was around her, his smile dazzling for the camera. Her own smile, she now realized, was a masterpiece of strained politeness. The man beside her in that picture, The man whose name she shared already felt like a stranger, an emperor obsessed with the reflection of his own burgeoning power in the glittering, soulless towers of finance. He was chasing more, always more, utterly oblivious, or perhaps chillingly indifferent, to the fact that his relentless, insatiable pursuit would soon lead him directly into the arms of temptation. A woman who, in her own way, mirrored his own ruthless, all-consuming ambition. A woman who would become the catalyst for the complete and utter destruction of their perfect marriage illusion. While Seraphina Vale felt increasingly adrift in the silent, echoing halls of their Oakhaven estate, a place that had begun to feel more like a beautifully appointed mausoleum than a home, Julian Thorne was navigating the glittering, treacherous currents of Aethelburg's uppermost echelons. His insatiable pursuit of more power, more influence, more dominion, led him through an endless circuit of exclusive networking opportunities, into rooms where fortunes were made and broken over a single glass of obscenely expensive whiskey. It was in one such rarefied atmosphere, a private dinner hosted in the breathtaking Zenith Tower Sky Lounge, a gilded cage suspended high above the sprawling city, amidst the murmur of hushed deals and the clinking of crystal, that a single, charged glance across the room became the first, dangerous spark of an inferno that was destined to consume everything. Her name was Isabelle Devereux. Izzy, to the very few she allowed past her impeccably polished armor. She was a public relations executive of almost mythical prowess, known throughout Aethelburg's power circles for her uncanny ability to spin any narrative, to transform disastrous press into dazzling triumph. Striking, with eyes that seemed to see straight through to a man's deepest ambitions, and a mind as sharp as a shard of ice, Isabelle was a force of nature. And Julian, a man who prided himself on recognizing power in all its forms, was drawn to her like a moth to a particularly incandescent and undoubtedly dangerous flame. Was this the excitement he craved? The intellectual sparring partner he felt Seraphina, in her gentle philanthropy, could no longer be? Or was it something far more primal? They met, not by chance. Such things rarely were in their world, but through a mutual business associate, a kingmaker who understood the value of connecting like-minded predators. Isabelle, a vision in crimson silk that contrasted sharply with the muted tones of the corporate wolves surrounding them, locked eyes with Julian. He recognized her instantly. Her firm had recently salvaged the reputation of a disgraced politician with a finesse that had been the talk of the city. Their conversation began with the predictable dance of intellectual jousting, corporate brand makeovers, crisis management strategies, the irony of philanthropic press strategies designed to buff the tarnished images of a few of Aethelburg's less savory tycoons. Yet, beneath the surface of professional discourse, an undeniable current crackled between them. By the end of the evening, personal contact details were exchanged, a silent acknowledgement of a connection that went far beyond future collaborations. Initially, their interactions maintained a veneer of professionalism. Isabelle, with her razor-sharp insights, pitched a series of audacious, even slightly ruthless ideas to help Thorne Dominion Capital enhance its corporate social responsibility profile. The goal wasn't genuine altruism, of course. It was about crafting an image of such unassailable virtue that Thorne Capital would become impervious to attack, its power absolute. Julian was impressed, intrigued. Seraphina, meanwhile, was drowning in a sea of private grief and public duty. Her father, the indomitable Augustus Sterling, was fading. His health, always robust, had taken a sharp decline following a complex heart surgery, and Seraphina found herself consumed by his care, a constant, anxious presence by his bedside at the sprawling Sterling estate. The immense responsibilities of Sterling Legacy Pharmaceuticals also weighed heavily upon her. When Julian, with a dismissive wave of his hand, mentioned Isabelle Devereux and her rather clever PR angles, Seraphina was too distracted, too emotionally depleted to register the subtle shift in his voice, the new, almost predatory gleam in his eye. How could she have known the true nature of this new professional relationship? How could anyone truly know what lurks in the shadows of a powerful man's ambition? Julian found Isabelle Devereux's company electrifying. Here was a woman who didn't just understand his relentless hunger for power, she mirrored it, fed it, with her own brand of cunning, intoxicating ambition. Their late-night phone calls, ostensibly to discuss upcoming press releases for Thorne Capital or to strategize over some minor market fluctuation, soon bled into the early hours of the morning. The talk of business became a thin veil for a far more personal, far more dangerous exploration. Flirtatious banter, charged with unspoken promises, escalated into something raw and undeniable. "You truly understand the game, Julian." Isabelle's voice, a seductive blend of velvet and steel, would murmur across the secure line. "So few people in this city actually get it. They play at power. We wield it." The pretense of professionalism soon frayed, then snapped. Discreet dinners in dimly lit, impossibly exclusive Aethelburg restaurants, tucked away from the prying eyes of society columnists, became their new ritual. Then came the secret rendezvous, far from the city's glare. Clandestine weekends in opulent boutique hotels in the sun-drenched coastal city of Porto Marina, or hushed assignations in sprawling suites at the ultra-exclusive Silvercrest Peaks Mountain Resort, all carefully disguised as urgent, unavoidable business trips on Julian's packed itinerary. The illicit affair had begun, a secret fire burning beneath the carefully constructed power couple facade. Julian, like many men embarking on the well-trodden path of infidelity, found his justifications easily enough. Seraphina was absent, wasn't she? Emotionally unavailable, too consumed by her father's decline, too wrapped up in her quaintly idealistic philanthropic duties at Sterling Legacy Pharmaceuticals. He told himself he craved a partner who matched his relentless pace, his boundless ambition. Isabelle was that, and so much more. She didn't coddle him. She challenged him, excited him. Or was he simply a man bored with his perfect life, seeking the thrill of the forbidden? What do you believe drives a man like Julian to risk everything? And Isabelle? What were her true motivations in this dangerous liaison? She certainly relished the power play, the intoxicating dance of intellect and ambition with a man like Julian Thorne. But there was something more, a sharper, more personal edge to her pursuit. She savored the idea of dethroning Saint Seraphina, the sterling heiress, the woman who seemed to glide through life on a cloud of inherited privilege and effortless grace. Perhaps it was a deeper vendetta. Whispers in the Devereux family, never spoken aloud but keenly felt, hinted at a past slight, a business deal years ago where her own father had been ruthlessly outmaneuvered, financially crippled, by none other than Augustus Sterling. Or maybe Isabelle's resentment was simpler, yet no less potent, a visceral disdain for the old money entitlement that Seraphina represented. Having clawed her own way up Aethelburg's slippery social and corporate ladder, with nothing but her wits and a will of iron. The Sterlings always did believe they were a cut above, didn't they, darling? Isabelle once purred to Julian, a dangerous glint in her eyes as they shared a bottle of illicitly expensive champagne in their Porto Marina hideaway. "It's refreshing to engage with someone from that rarefied orbit who actually understands the necessity of playing to win, Julian. No matter the cost." The words and the way she looked at him sent a shiver down even Julian's spine. This was no mere dalliance. This was a woman with a score to settle, and he was, perhaps, merely a weapon in her arsenal. Or was he? Soon, the carefully managed seeds of doubt began to sprout in Aethelburg's fertile social soil. Julian Thorne and that Devereux woman, quite the pair, wouldn't you say? The whispers slithered through exclusive clubs and hushed dinner parties. Seraphina, already stretched to her emotional limit with Augustus's worsening condition, the post-surgery complications were dire, heard them. A well-meaning but tactless acquaintance mentioned seeing Julian and Isabelle looking awfully cozy at a gallery opening she herself couldn't attend. She tried to dismiss it. Pure conjecture, malicious gossip. Julian was busy, stressed. How could he possibly betray her, betray their vows, especially now, with her father so ill? Yet, the denial felt increasingly hollow. The power couple facade she had to maintain in public felt like a lead weight upon her chest. Then came the photograph. It wasn't from a major tabloid. Those could be managed, suppressed. No, this was more insidious. At a high-profile charity auction, one Seraphina had been forced to miss due to a sudden downturn in Augustus's condition. A freelance photographer, always hungry for a candid shot that might fetch a price, captured Julian and Isabelle. They were locked in an uncomfortably close dance, his hand resting possessively low on the curve of Isabelle's back. her head tilted up towards him, her eyes sparkling with a potent cocktail of adoration and something that looked alarmingly like triumph. The image, raw and unposed, landed not in the papers, but in the private message inboxes of several prominent Aethelburg socialites, including, inevitably, Clara Vance. Clara, her face a mask of concern, approached Seraphina at the Sterling estate, where Seraphina was keeping a vigil by her father's side. "Sarah," Clara began, her voice gentle but firm, "I truly hate to be the one to show you this. I know how much you're dealing with, but you need to see it. What do you make of this?" Seraphina's blood ran cold as she stared at the image on Clara's phone. Her breath hitched. It was, on the surface, just a dance, a private conversation amidst a crowd. But the intimacy, it was a physical blow. Julian's proprietary stance, Isabelle's almost smug possessiveness, it screamed of something far beyond a professional relationship. It's Isabelle Devereaux," Seraphina managed, her voice a thin thread. "She's handling some new PR initiatives for Thorne Capital. It's probably just business, Clara." Even as she said the words, they tasted like ash in her mouth. Clara didn't push. She simply squeezed Seraphina's hand, her eyes full of a sorrowful understanding that mirrored Seraphina's own dawning horror. The final undeniable proof came a few days later, a cold, hard piece of betrayal nestled amongst Julian's bespoke suits. He'd just returned from another urgent business trip, this time to the snowy, exclusive chalets of Silvercrest Peaks. As Seraphina mechanically unpacked his travel bag, her fingers brushed against something small, hard, and unfamiliar. It was a cufflink, an ostentatiously expensive, diamond-studded monstrosity, in a style so garish, so unlike Julian's usually impeccable, understated taste. It wasn't hers. She hadn't bought it for him. It screamed of another woman's less refined, more demanding taste. Isabelle. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The smoking gun. The irrefutable evidence of his betrayal. That evening, in the vast, chillingly silent drawing room of their Oakhaven mansion, she confronted him. Her voice trembled, but her gaze was direct as she held up the glittering, damning object. "Julian, what is this? Where did this come from?" For a fleeting second, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, annoyance, guilt. It was gone in an instant, replaced by that all-too-familiar mask of cool, dismissive composure. "A cufflink, Seraphina?" He raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Darling, I own dozens. It was likely a corporate gift from some client or other. I barely recall. Are you quite well? You seem rather overwrought this evening." He didn't even bother to look at it closely. He simply turned away, picking up a financial report, his body language a clear dismissal. The conversation was over before it had even begun. Seraphina stood frozen, the cold, heavy cufflink digging into her palm, the denial. So casual, so complete. Her trust, already eroded by months of whispers and unease, finally shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The air in their opulent home grew thick, suffocating, charged with unspoken accusations and the bitter taste of an unforgivable betrayal. Julian's lies, she now knew, were as smooth and polished as the marble beneath her feet. But she felt a profound, chilling dread creep into her soul. This was more than just an illicit affair. This was a declaration of war on everything she held sacred. And little did she know, the true depth of his treachery and the earth-shattering news that would irrevocably alter the course of her life was still lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. 2 heartbeats, not just one, were now caught in the crossfire. The chilling finality of Julian's denial about the cufflink, his casual dismissal of her pain, echoed in the vast emptiness of their Oakhaven mansion. It was more than just a betrayal. It felt like a declaration of war on everything Seraphina Vale held sacred. And as she stood there, the cold, diamond-studded proof heavy in her hand, a profound dread settled in her heart. Little did she know then, the true, horrifying depth of his treachery, and the earth-shattering news that would irrevocably alter the course of her life, was still lurking in the shadows, waiting for the precise moment to strike. 2 heartbeats, not just one, were now caught in the devastating crossfire of his ambition. It was the unbearable stress, the gnawing anxiety, the sleepless nights spent staring at the ornate ceiling of her lonely bedroom that finally drove Seraphina to the discreet Aethelburg clinic of Dr. Evelyn Hayes. Dr. Hayes, a woman whose warmth and wisdom had been a comforting presence in the Sterling family for decades, listened patiently as Seraphina, her voice barely a whisper, spoke of migraines, of an exhaustion so profound it felt bone deep. A routine doctor's visit for stress. That's all it was supposed to be. But it delivered a verdict that ripped through Seraphina's carefully constructed composure. A verdict that changed everything. After a series of tests, Dr. Hayes returned, her usually serene face etched with a mixture of surprise and gentle sympathy. "Seraphina, my dear," she began, taking Seraphina's trembling hands in her own. "There's something unexpected. Despite all this turmoil, all this stress you're under." She paused, her eyes meeting Seraphina's. "Congratulations, Seraphina. You're pregnant." Pregnant. The word hung in the sterile air of the examination room, a tiny, impossible lifeboat in a raging sea. A baby. Julian's baby. Her baby. A maelstrom of emotions churned within her. Shock, certainly. A sudden, wild surge of protective instinct. And beneath it all, a fragile, desperate flicker of hope. Could this be it? Could a child, their child, be the anchor to mend their fractured marriage, to remind Julian of the vows he seemed so eager to discard? Or was it just another complication in an already impossible situation? What would you hope for in such a moment? The timing, as fate so often cruelly dictates, couldn't have been more devastating. Her beloved father, Augustus Sterling, the titan who had always been her rock, had finally succumbed to his illness just weeks before. The solemn, rain-drenched funeral ceremony in Newbury Haven, the hushed condolences, the crushing weight of grief, it was all still so raw, so immediate. And swirling around this vortex of personal sorrow were the increasingly audacious rumors of Julian's affair with Isabelle Devereux, whispers that had now escalated to a low, persistent hum throughout Aethelburg's elite circles. Yet Seraphina clung to that sliver of hope. A baby. Perhaps this news, this undeniable proof of their shared future, would pierce through Julian's cold ambition. She waited, her heart a nervous drum against her ribs, for a rare evening when he was actually home from his endless business engagements. She found him, as she so often did, cloistered in his immense mahogany-paneled study, the glow of multiple screens reflecting in his intense, focused eyes, spreadsheets and market reports. Thorne Dominion Capital, his true mistress. He'd barely touched the exquisite dinner their chef had prepared, now congealing on a silver tray. "Julian," she began, her hands clasped tightly to still their trembling, the words catching in her throat. "Julian, I have something important to tell you." He barely glanced up, his fingers still flying across a keyboard. "Can it wait, Seraphina? I'm right in the middle of finalizing the Kincaid acquisition. It's critical." His voice was clipped, impatient. She forced a fragile, trembling smile. "No, Julian, it really can't." She took a shaky breath. "I'm pregnant." Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the opulent room. For a heartbeat, Julian froze. Then his eyes, those dark, unreadable eyes, darted from his laptop screen to meet hers. She braced herself, desperately searching for a glimmer of joy, a flicker of tenderness, anything that a husband, a father-to-be, should feel. Instead, his expression was a horrifying kaleidoscope of emotions she couldn't decipher. Shock, yes, but also a deep, furrowed worry, and something else. Something utterly chilling and unrecognizable that looked to her dawning horror like pure, unadulterated dread. He finally managed to speak, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth as he reached for the crystal decanter of bourbon on his desk. "Well, that's significant news. A beat. Congratulations, I suppose." "Congratulations, you suppose?" The words were a choked whisper. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, hot and betraying. "Julian, this is our child, our baby." He sighed then, a sound of profound weariness, or perhaps annoyance. He closed his laptop with a deliberate, chillingly precise click. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm, distant, and utterly devastating. "Look, Seraphina, this is obviously a lot to process right now. My schedule is, frankly, it's insane, and we still have other things to settle in this marriage." He paused, swallowing hard, his gaze drifting to some distant point beyond her shoulder. "To be perfectly honest, the timing couldn't possibly be worse." "Bad timing?" she repeated, the words a hollow echo of her shattered hope. "Bad timing? For our child?" He ran a hand through his impeccably styled hair, a gesture of controlled frustration. I need some time to think, Seraphina. To process this. We'll discuss it later, all right?" And before she could utter another word, another protest, another plea, He rose from his imposing leather chair and strode from the room. His footsteps, sharp and decisive on the polished marble floors, faded up the grand staircase, leaving Seraphina standing alone in the cavernous drawing room, the echo of her shattered hopes the only sound in the crushing silence. In the days that followed, Julian meticulously avoided any mention of the pregnancy. It was as if her life-altering announcement had never happened. Then, with an almost casual air, he informed her he was leaving for an urgent, extended business trip to Porto Marina. "Critical deal with the Sovereign Wealth Fund," he'd said, his eyes already distant. "I'll be back in a week, maybe 2. We'll talk then." Seraphina didn't need to ask if Isabelle Devereux would be accompanying him. The cold certainty of it was a fresh stab to her already wounded heart. It was Clara Vance, her fiercely loyal cousin, who refused to let Seraphina suffer in silence. Seeing the depth of Seraphina's despair, the way the light had completely drained from her eyes, Clara took matters into her own hands. Without a word to Seraphina, she engaged the services of Aethelburg's most discreet and most effective private investigator. The reports that came back were brutal, unequivocal. Julian wasn't just in Porto Marina for business. He was photographed dining intimately with Isabelle Devereux at secluded beachfront restaurants, their laughter echoing over the crashing waves. He was seen entering a luxurious private villa with her, the kind of opulent love nest that screamed of illicit affairs and stolen weekends. The PI even provided flight manifests. Isabelle had been on the same private jet. There was no room left for doubt. No escape from the ugly truth. Clara, her own heart aching for Seraphina, had the unenviable task of laying out the damning evidence, the carefully curated photographs, the cold, hard facts of receipts and travel itineraries. For Seraphina, the initial anguish, the soul-crushing grief, began to curdle, to transform into something else, a cold, simmering rage, a terrifying, unfamiliar resolve. This wasn't just a betrayal of love, of vows. This was a calculated, cruel dismantling of her life, her dignity, perpetrated while she mourned her father and carried their child. How could any man be so callous, so utterly devoid of common decency? When Julian finally returned from Porto Marina, tanned and infuriatingly nonchalant, expecting perhaps a quietly resentful wife, but certainly not a full-blown rebellion, he walked into an ambush. Seraphina was waiting for him in the grand living room of their Oakhaven estate. But this was no longer their shared sanctuary. It had become her courtroom, and she was both judge and jury. Spread across the antique mahogany coffee table, like exhibits in a criminal trial, were the glossy photographs, the damning receipts, the irrefutable proof of his treachery. Julian stopped dead in his tracks, his customary charming smile faltering as he took in the scene. "What in God's name is all this, Seraphina?" he demanded, his eyes flitting over the incriminating evidence. Her voice, when she spoke, was astonishingly calm, low and laced with a tremor of controlled fury. "You tell me, Julian, these rather intimate photographs from the Villa Azur in Porto Marina, these receipts for champagne and jewels I certainly never received. You've been lying to me, Julian, consistently, brazenly, lying to your pregnant wife while she was burying her father." For a moment, he was speechless. Genuine shock, or just the surprise of being caught so thoroughly? Then the Thorne arrogance, that impenetrable shield of entitlement, slammed back into place. "You've had me followed?" he snarled, his face darkening. "You've been spying on me? That's a despicable invasion of my privacy, Seraphina. How dare you?" A raw, humorless laugh escaped Seraphina's lips. "My privacy? Don't you dare attempt to turn this around on me, Julian Thorne. You shattered our vows, you betrayed me, and you stand there, still lying to my face." He slammed his expensive leather briefcase onto the floor, the sound reverberating through the tense silence. "Fine, yes, it's true. Isabelle and I are together," he spat, his carefully constructed composure finally cracking. "And you know what, Seraphina? We're happy. There's a spark there, a real passion, a genuine connection, something you and we lost that a very long time ago, if it ever truly existed beyond your father's meticulously arranged balance sheets and strategic alliances." The cruelty of his words struck her with the force of a physical blow. She visibly staggered then. Drawing on some hidden reserve of strength, she straightened, her eyes now dry, blazing with a cold, hard light. "Get out," she whispered, her voice a dangerous sliver of ice. "Pack your bags. I don't want you in this house, in my father's house, another night. Julian stared at her, disbelief warring with a rising tide of anger. You can't be serious, Seraphina. This is my house too. And let's not conveniently forget that a significant portion of your precious Sterling family estate is inextricably tied up with Thorne Dominion capital. Are you absolutely certain you want to ignite this particular war? Seraphina simply pointed towards the massive, intricately carved oak front door. Her resolve was absolute, like tempered steel. Leave, now. Seething, his face a mask of fury, Julian snatched up his briefcase and stormed out, slamming the door with such violence that a priceless Ming Dynasty vase on a nearby console teetered, then crashed to the marble floor, shattering into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Much like their marriage. Seraphina sank into a nearby armchair, the adrenaline that had fueled her finally ebbing away, leaving her trembling and utterly exhausted. Tears flowed then, hot, angry, cleansing tears, but intertwined with the grief was a dawning, terrible resolve. She gently cradled her abdomen, a fiercely protective instinct surging through her. "We'll be okay, little one," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "I swear to you, we will be all right, and he will pay for this." In that moment, something shifted irrevocably within Seraphina Vale. The heartbroken, betrayed wife was receding. A warrior, forged in the fires of grief and fury, was beginning to emerge. Within a week, the Aethelburg society pages and financial tabloids were ablaze with the scandal. Julian Thorne and Isabelle Devereaux were not only together, they were brazenly, publicly, cohabiting in a lavish, multi-million-dollar penthouse overlooking the city skyline. A new acquisition, the papers gleefully reported, undoubtedly funded by Thorne Dominion capital. "Thorne's torrid affair rocks Aethelburg," screamed one headline. "Sterling Harris betrayed while pregnant and grieving," shrieked another. The public scandal was immediate and brutal. Seraphina, hounded by a relentless press corps camped outside the gates of the Oakhaven estate, maintained a stoic, dignified silence. She retreated from the world, finding a strange, cold comfort in the quiet sanctuary of her late father's private study. It was a room she'd rarely entered when Augustus was alive, always feeling it to be his sacrosanct domain. Now, surrounded by his books, his papers, the lingering scent of his favorite pipe tobacco, she felt a fragile connection to his strength, his wisdom. Her fingers, almost idly, traced the intricate carvings on his massive antique mahogany desk. They paused on a small, almost invisible decorative inlay. Intrigued, she pressed it. With a soft click, a hidden compartment, one she'd never known existed, slid silently open. Inside, nestled amongst neatly bundled stacks of old business ledgers and what looked like her father's private journals, was a small, exquisitely crafted but undeniably heavy, locked strongbox made of dark, aged wood, bound with tarnished brass. It felt significant, ancient. She had no key for it. Not yet, but a thrilling, dangerous premonition, a sense of destiny, coursed through her veins. What secrets had her meticulous, far-sighted father left behind for her? What weapons, perhaps, lay dormant within that silent, locked box waiting for his daughter to uncover them? The scandal raged outside her gates, but within the quiet confines of Augustus Sterling's study, Seraphina felt a new, steely purpose begin to form. Julian Thorne thought he was untouchable, did he? He thought he had won. He had absolutely no idea of the storm that was about to break over his perfectly curated world. A storm born from a father's secrets and a wronged wife's vow of war. The scandal surrounding Julian Thorne and Isabelle Devereaux's brazen public cohabitation was now a wildfire, consuming the society pages and financial columns of every Aethelburg publication. Julian Thorne, the untouchable titan, was suddenly, shockingly, very, very touchable. Yet he seemed utterly oblivious, or perhaps chillingly indifferent, to the devastation he was wreaking. He believed he had won, that Seraphina, his grieving pregnant wife, was a broken casualty of his ambition. He had absolutely no idea of the storm that was about to break over his perfectly curated world, a storm born from a father's hidden secrets and a wronged wife's quietly forged vow of war. Amidst the maelstrom, Seraphina Vale, outwardly a portrait of sterling stoicism, was internally a tempest of grief, fury, and a nascent, steely resolve. She knew she couldn't navigate these treacherous waters alone. The first, most critical step was to secure legal counsel of unimpeachable integrity and formidable skill. She thought immediately of Elias Vance. Her cousin Clara's distinguished uncle, Elias, was a lion of Aethelburg's legal landscape, a man whose reputation for brilliance in complex corporate law and fiercely protecting his clients' estate interests was legendary. More importantly, he had been a close friend and trusted confidant to her father, Augustus Sterling, for decades. The meeting took place in Elias Vance's imposing book-lined chambers overlooking Aethelburg's historic city square. The scent of old leather and polished mahogany filled the air, a stark contrast to the sterile opulence of the Thorne Sterling homes. Seraphina, now visibly pregnant, her sorrow and exhaustion etched onto her usually luminous features, laid out the sordid tale. Julian's calculated affair with Isabelle Devereux, his callous indifference to their unborn child, his chilling ultimatum, and the deeply entangled finances of Sterling Corp with Thorne Dominion Capital. Elias listened, his keen, intelligent eyes missing nothing, his expression growing progressively grimmer with each revelation. When Seraphina finished, a heavy silence filled the room. "Seraphina," he finally said, his voice a low rumble of controlled power. "Julian Thorne is a formidable adversary. He will not relinquish control, or what he perceives as his assets, without an exceptionally brutal fight. This will be unpleasant. More than unpleasant. He will try to leverage everything against you, your grief, your pregnancy, your Sterling inheritance. He will seek to portray you as unstable, unfit. Are you truly prepared for the depths to which he might sink?" Seraphina's hand instinctively went to the small, antique silver locket nestled at her throat, a cherished piece her father had gifted her on her 16th birthday. She had worn it nearly every day since, a silent talisman. Unaware as yet of its true hidden significance, she drew a strange comfort from its familiar weight. "I am, Mr. Vance," she stated, her voice surprisingly firm, a new strength hardening her gaze. "I have to protect my child, and I have to protect my father's legacy from that man. What would you do if your entire world, your family's honor, was on the line? Would you find that same courage?" Days later, as Elias Vance and his formidable legal team began the painstaking process of dissecting the labyrinthine financial agreements between Sterling Corp and Thorne Dominion Capital, the call Seraphina had been dreading, yet somehow expecting, arrived. She was at the Oak Haven estate, attempting to find a fleeting moment of peace in the gardens her father had so loved, when her phone buzzed with an urgent, frantic text from Clara. "Sarah, emergency. Get down to the Aethelburg Central Courthouse now. Julian is there. With her. Isabelle Devereux. Something about divorce papers. The media are everywhere. It's a circus." A cold dread washed over Seraphina. Julian wouldn't. He couldn't. Not like this. Not so publicly, so cruelly. Could he truly be that much of a monster? She raced to Aethelburg, her driver navigating the city traffic with grim efficiency. The scene outside the Aethelburg Central Courthouse was exactly as Clara had described, a full-blown media feeding frenzy. Reporters, photographers, television crews, a veritable wolf pack, all baying for a soundbite, a damning image. As Seraphina stepped out of her car, a barrage of flashbulbs momentarily blinded her. Microphones were thrust aggressively in her face. Mrs. Thorne, is it true you're pregnant? Seraphina, any comment on your husband's very public affair with Isabelle Devereux? How will this divorce impact Sterling Corp's shares? Is Thorne Dominion Capital facing a hostile takeover from within?" Her face a pale, impassive mask, Seraphina pushed through the seething crowd, her security detail creating a small, inadequate buffer. She offered no comment, her silence a stark contrast to the cacophony surrounding her. Inside the imposing, marble-howled courthouse, the air was cold, the atmosphere echoing and stark. And there he was. Julian Thorne. Impeccably dressed in a bespoke navy suit, radiating an aura of unassailable confidence, he stood near the clerk's office, a sheaf of documents in his hand. And clinging to his arm, practically draped over him like a predatory vine, was Isabelle Devereux. She was a vision in a scandalously tight, crimson pencil dress, her lips curved into a smug, triumphant smirk as she surveyed the scene, clearly reveling in the drama, in Seraphina's evident distress. It was a masterclass in public humiliation, a calculated, brazen display of power and contempt. This wasn't just about divorce. This was about annihilation. Seraphina's voice, when she finally found it, trembled with a toxic brew of unspeakable rage and profound hurt. "Julian, what is the meaning of this circus?" He turned, his expression one of almost bored indifference. He actually shrugged. "Simply expediting the inevitable, Seraphina, my dear," he said, his tone maddeningly calm. "Filing the divorce papers. I saw no earthly reason to prolong the charade any further." He then had the audacity to glance towards Isabelle, who offered Seraphina a look of such thinly veiled venomous triumph it made her stomach churn. "Isabelle," Julian continued, his voice smooth as poisoned silk, "is merely here for moral support, as a friend." Isabelle Devereux then stepped forward, her crimson-clad figure a deliberate affront. Her voice, when she spoke, dripped with a sickeningly sweet, utterly false condescension. "Oh, Seraphina, darling, I am so terribly, terribly sorry you had to find out this way. Truly. But sometimes, relationships they just run their natural course, don't they? Some connections are simply stronger, more aligned with one's true ambitions." The calculated, vicious slight was like a fresh twist of a knife in an already gaping wound. Seraphina momentarily reeled, then drew a ragged breath, ignoring Isabelle completely. Her gaze, burning with a cold fire, fixed on Julian. Her voice, though still quivering, gained an astonishing strength. "In front of all these people? You choose to turn our private life, our marriage, into this public pillory? Is this truly what you want, Julian? Is this who you are?" For the briefest of moments, the shortest intake of breath, a flicker of something, uncertainty, regret, shame perhaps, crossed Julian's usually inscrutable face. It was there, then gone, so quickly Seraphina almost doubted she'd seen it. It was instantly replaced by that familiar mask of icy, unyielding resolve. "Yes, Seraphina," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "It is. This marriage is over." Seraphina nodded slowly. Her hand, almost unconsciously, rose to touch the antique silver locket at her throat. And as her fingers closed around its cool, familiar shape, something within her, something deep and primal, coalesced. Her resolve, already hardening, now solidified into pure, unadulterated steel. "Fine," she said, her voice suddenly clear, resonant, cutting through the charged air. "Have your circus, Julian. Have your tawdry public spectacle. Have your divorce." She paused, her eyes locking with his, a dangerous glint in their depths. "But don't you dare think, Julian Thorne, not for one single solitary second, that you will walk away from this, from me, unscathed." With that, she spun on her heel, her back ramrod straight, and walked towards the courthouse exit, head held high, utterly ignoring Isabelle Devereux's self-satisfied, predatory smirk. As she re-entered the maelstrom of the paparazzi, the flashbulbs exploded anew, capturing images of her face, tear-streaked, yes, but also etched with an undeniable, formidable defiance. She said nothing, not a word. Back in the quiet, imposing sanctuary of Elias Vance's Aethelburg office, the carefully constructed dam of Seraphina's composure finally broke. The devastation, the humiliation, the sheer, unadulterated rage poured out of her in a torrent of racking sobs. Elias, a man of immense empathy despite his hardened legal exterior, listened patiently, allowing her the space to grieve, to rage. But through the tears, through the pain, her determination, her vow of war, remained absolute. "He wants a war, Mr. Vance," she finally choked out, wiping her eyes with a trembling hand. "Then by God, he will get one. We fight him, with everything we have, with everything my father built." Elias, a flicker of admiration in his astute eyes, nodded gravely. "Then we fight, Seraphina, and we fight to win." He began to outline their initial strategy. The immediate assembly of Aethelburg's most formidable legal minds, a deep, meticulous forensic dive into every financial transaction, every contract, every hidden clause linking Sterling Corporation's vast resources to Thorne Dominion Capital. "But prepare yourself, my dear," he advised, his voice somber. "Julian Thorne will not hesitate to use every dirty trick, every ounce of his considerable influence, every resource he possesses, to crush you. We must anticipate his moves. We must be ruthless." That night, back in the oppressive, echoing silence of her father's private study at the Oakhaven estate, Seraphina felt a strange, almost magnetic pull towards the antique silver locket she wore. It had been a constant companion, a tangible link to Augustus, a cherished memento of his love. She had always assumed it was just that, a beautiful, sentimental piece of Victorian jewelry. Now, as she sat at his imposing mahogany desk, the weight of her father's legacy, the precarious future of her unborn child, pressing down on her, her fingers traced the locket's intricate, almost forgotten filigree carvings. She twisted it idly, her mind racing. And then, a soft, almost inaudible click. Her breath caught. She'd never noticed a clasp before, a tiny, almost invisible mechanism cleverly disguised within the ornate design. With trembling fingers, she pressed it again. The locket sprang open. But there was no miniature portrait inside, no lock of hair. Instead, nestled securely within a velvet-lined compartment, lay a tiny, exquisitely crafted, uniquely shaped silver key. A key. Her heart gave a sickening lurch, then began to pound with a wild, electrifying surge of adrenaline. Could it be? The locked strongbox. The one she had discovered in the hidden compartment of Augustus's desk. This had to be the key. With hands that shook so violently she could barely control them, Seraphina retrieved the heavy, age-darkened wooden strongbox. Its brass fittings were tarnished with time, its presence exuding an aura of ancient secrets. She inserted the tiny silver key from the locket into the strongbox's intricate, old-fashioned lock. It fit perfectly. She turned the key. There was a faint grating sound, then another, more definitive click. The heavy lid, with a soft, protesting creak, opened. Her breath caught in her throat. Inside, resting atop stacks of yellowed stock certificates, faded personal letters, and what looked like her father's most private journals, was a thick, imposing, leather-bound folio. Its title, embossed in elegant but now faded gold lettering, read, Sterling Thorne Capital Partnership Agreement, Private Codicils and Stipulations. Her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might break free, Seraphina lifted the heavy folio. With trembling fingers she opened it, and there it was, page after page of dense, impenetrable legalese, financial projections, and then a section, clearly delineated, penned in her father's unmistakable, precise, forceful handwriting. It was titled Addendum, Clause Pertaining to Breach of Trust, Moral Integrity, and Public Disrepute. Breathless, her eyes devouring the words, Seraphina read. And as she read, a slow, incredulous, and utterly electrifying understanding began to dawn. Her father, her brilliant, far-sighted, fiercely protective father, had anticipated this. He had foreseen the possibility of Julian's treachery. The clause was a masterpiece of legal craftsmanship, a silent, ticking time bomb. It stated, in language that was both ironclad and unequivocal, that should Julian Thorne, as managing partner of Thorne Dominion Capital, in its alliance with Sterling Corporation, engage in any actions that brought public dishonor upon the Sterling name or that compromised the ethical integrity and foundational intent of the Sterling-Thorne partnership, with specific damning examples cited, including, almost prophetically, public infidelity leading to scandal or actions that brought significant disrepute upon the Sterling family. Then all capital invested by Sterling Corporation in Thorne Dominion Capital, along with all accrued profits, dividends, and any assets directly or indirectly derived therefrom, would be subject to immediate, non-negotiable, and full reclamation by the Sterling family estate. It wasn't just an ace up her sleeve. It was a nuclear warhead. Augustus Sterling had armed his daughter from beyond the grave. Tears streamed down Seraphina's face as she clutched the aged documents. But these were not tears of sorrow or even of rage. These were tears of a dawning, fierce, and utterly breathtaking triumph. Julian Thorne was busy drafting his own battle plans, consulting with his own high-powered lawyers, arrogantly underestimating the storm that was about to break over his head. He thought he was in control. He thought he held all the cards. He had no idea. The next confrontation, Seraphina vowed, her voice a hoarse whisper in the silent, watchful room, would be on her ground, with her rules, and with the full, devastating weight of her father's legacy behind her. The weighty, leather-bound folio containing her father's meticulously crafted private codicils and stipulations felt like a sacred relic in Seraphina Vale's hands. Augustus Sterling, her brilliant, far-sighted, and fiercely protective father, had indeed armed his daughter from beyond the grave. The tears that had streamed down her face upon its discovery were not tears of sorrow, nor even solely of rage. They were tears of a dawning, fierce, and utterly breathtaking triumph. Julian Thorne, her estranged husband, was no doubt busy drafting his own battle plans, consulting with his own phalanx of high-powered, ruthless lawyers, arrogantly underestimating the devastating storm that was about to break directly over his unsuspecting head. He thought he was in control. He believed he held all the cards. He had absolutely no idea. The next confrontation, Seraphina vowed, her voice a hoarse whisper in the silent, watchful room of her father's study, would be on her ground, with her rules, and it would be delivered with the full, crushing weight of Augustus Sterling's indomitable legacy behind her. Armed with this veritable trump card, Seraphina, accompanied by the redoubtable Elias Vance and her ever-loyal, fiercely protective cousin Clara, orchestrated the next move. No more hushed meetings in lawyers' offices. This called for a direct strike at the very heart of Julian Thorne's empire. A meeting was arranged, no, demanded, in the main boardroom of Thorne Dominion Capital, a sterile, imposing chamber high in one of Aethelburg's glittering skyscrapers, a room that had witnessed countless hostile takeovers and ruthless corporate power plays. Today, Julian Thorne, the undisputed master of such maneuvers, was about to realize, with a sickening lurch, that he was the one being cornered, his entire empire hanging precariously by the slender thread of a dead man's promise. Julian was already seated at the head of the massive, polished mahogany table when they were ushered in. Isabelle Devereux perched confidently, almost proprietarily beside him, a feline smile playing on her lips. The air in the room was ice-cold, thick with unspoken animosity. Well, Seraphina," Julian began, his voice laced with a condescending amusement as he gestured dismissively towards the authenticated copies of the Sterling-Thorne Partnership Agreement and its critical addendum that Elias Vance calmly placed on the table. "What's this latest melodrama? More theatrics for your esteemed legal counsel, perhaps?" Seraphina met his gaze, her own cool, steady, and utterly unreadable. "These, Julian," she stated, her voice clear and devoid of any tremor, "are my father's precise instructions, his legally binding stipulations regarding the Sterling family's substantial investments in Thorne Dominion Capital. Specifically," she paused, letting the weight of her words sink in, "they detail the explicit conditions under which those investments, and crucially, all profits and assets derived therefrom, are to be immediately and fully reclaimed by the Sterling estate." Isabelle Devereux let out a short, brittle scoff. "Moral and ethical breaches? How delightfully quaint, darling. What on earth does that even mean in the brutal, unsentimental world of high finance and billion-dollar deals?" Seraphina's gaze remained fixed on Julian, utterly ignoring Isabelle's interruption. "It means, Julian," she continued, her voice still quiet, but each word landing with the impact of a precisely aimed hammer blow, "that your very public, very sordid, and utterly shameless affair with Miss Devereux here, an affair plastered across every tabloid and gossip blog in Aethelburg, while you were still legally married to me, while I was carrying your child, and while I was in the deepest throes of mourning my father. Well, Julian, that constitutes a rather significant and, quite frankly, unforgivable breach of trust. It means," she paused again, allowing the full implication to register, "that you forfeit any and all claim to the Sterling funds that formed the very bedrock of Thorne Dominion Capital. Furthermore, Julian, you are now legally liable for returning all profits generated from those funds since the very inception of our original partnership agreement." The silence that followed was absolute, deafening. Julian's carefully cultivated composure finally cracked. A dark flush crept up his neck, and a vein began to throb visibly at his temple. Isabelle, for the first time, looked genuinely alarmed, her eyes darting nervously between Julian and the damning documents on the table. That's absurd," Isabelle finally snapped, her voice suddenly shrill. "You have no proof of anything that would possibly stand up in a court of law. This is just a desperate, pathetic bluff." Seraphina merely arched an eyebrow, a gesture of cool disdain. "No proof, Miss Devereux?" she queried, her voice dangerously soft. She nodded towards Elias Vance, who, with impeccable timing, opened a meticulously compiled and rather thick dossier, placing it squarely in the center of the table. "Oh, I believe we have rather an abundance of it. Wouldn't you agree, Julian?" She gestured towards the open dossier. "Printed copies of every salacious news article, every lurid blog post detailing your liaison, an extensive collection of rather explicit photographic evidence, some of which, I must say, is quite illuminating. Social media commentary that paints a most unflattering portrait. My husband, you see, Miss Devereux, made absolutely certain there was ample, irrefutable proof, every single time he so proudly and publicly flaunted you around Aethelburg, as if you were some sort of, well, some sort of new acquisition. Julian Thorne shot to his feet, his palms slamming down hard on the polished mahogany, rattling the expensive crystal water glasses. "That clause will never hold up in court," he snarled, his voice raw with a mixture of disbelief and dawning fury. This was a business arrangement, a partnership between consenting adults. You can't just unilaterally yank the entire financial foundation out from under my company because your delicate feelings are hurt, Seraphina. My feelings, Julian? Seraphina's voice was still quiet, yet it resonated with an undeniable, unshakable steel. Do you truly believe, after everything, that this is merely about my hurt feelings? Though God knows, you've inflicted more than your share of those. Her gaze hardened. No, Julian, this is about honor. This is about integrity. This is about my father's legacy. A legacy you have so casually, so callously defiled. I am protecting what is rightfully mine, what was entrusted to me by Augustus Sterling. And more importantly, I am protecting what rightfully belongs to our unborn child. You made this choice, Julian. Not me. You chose this path of deceit and betrayal. Clara Vance, ever watchful, ever protective, sensed the hostility in the room approaching a dangerous boiling point. She stepped forward slightly, her presence a calming counterpoint to the escalating tension. "Gentlemen, Miss Devereux," she interjected, her voice cool and professional. "We are here, as Mrs. Thorne has indicated, to propose an arrangement. A comprehensive settlement that secures Seraphina's financial interests, including substantial and ongoing child support, and ensures the full and immediate return of all Sterling assets as stipulated by this legally binding clause. Or, of course," Clara paused, a slight, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips, "we can allow the courts to handle the enforcement of this rather explosive clause. And trust me, gentlemen, the Aethelburg Chronicle, not to mention every financial journalist and society columnist in this city, will absolutely adore that particular story. The Thorne Dominion capital implosion. It will be legendary." Julian, for the first time since Seraphina had known him, looked genuinely stunned, cornered, the blood draining from his face. The master manipulator, the corporate predator, was realizing with a sickening clarity the monumental, catastrophic threat to his entire empire. Thorne Dominion Capital, the edifice of his ambition, had been substantially built upon Sterling seed money, upon Augustus Sterling's reputation and financial backing. Losing that initial investment, plus years of accrued profits, it meant utter, absolute ruin. He visibly swallowed, his usual arrogance momentarily deserting him. He sank back into his chair. I need time," he finally managed, his voice a hoarse whisper, his gaze studiously avoiding Seraphina's. "I need to consult my legal team, Victoria Rexford." Isabelle Devereux, however, was not about to go down without a fight. Her own carefully cultivated reputation, her lavish lifestyle, perhaps even her hidden stake in Julian's continued success, were all hanging in the balance. "Don't you dare back down, Julian," she hissed at him under her breath, her eyes blazing with a furious, desperate light. "Victoria Rexford will crush her. This is a bluff, a pathetic attempt to intimidate you. Don't be a fool." Julian did consult his notoriously aggressive and ruinously expensive litigator, Victoria Rexford. But the advice he received was not what he, or Isabelle, had hoped for. Victoria, after a thorough review of Augustus Sterling's meticulously crafted clause and the mountain of evidence Seraphina's team had compiled regarding Julian's very public affair, delivered a grim prognosis. "The optics are catastrophic, Julian," Victoria stated bluntly, her voice devoid of any comforting allusions. "Augustus Sterling's legal craftsmanship here is formidable, and your rather public indiscretions with Ms. Devereux make any kind of moral defense or any argument against the breach of trust stipulation virtually impossible. Frankly, this clause is likely ironclad." Desperate, relentlessly pushed by an increasingly frantic Isabelle Devereux, and facing the very real prospect of losing everything he had built, Julian Thorne made a decision that would forever cement his reputation as a man utterly devoid of conscience. He decided to play his vilest, most despicable card. Victoria Rexford scheduled an emergency meeting with Elias Vance. The ultimatum delivered was as shocking as it was cruel. Seraphina Vale was to immediately relinquish all claims under the Sterling clause, except a generous but absolutely final one-time settlement, a fraction of what was truly owed. Or Julian Thorne would initiate proceedings to seek full sole custody of their unborn child. The grounds? Seraphina's alleged profound mental and emotional instability, brought on by her father's recent death, the undeniable stress of their very public divorce, and what Victoria Rexford chillingly termed her increasingly erratic and obsessive behavior. A narrative, Elias Vance knew, they would have no qualms about manufacturing and viciously prosecuting in the public arena of a custody battle. When Elias relayed this monstrous threat to Seraphina, she was at the Oakhaven estate, resting, trying to protect the fragile new life within her from the poison of Julian's making. For a moment, she was utterly terrified, paralyzed by the grotesque image of a public, slanderous custody battle over her precious, innocent baby. Her hand flew to her belly, a protective maternal instinct surging through her. He wouldn't. He couldn't. He wouldn't dare. But then, the terror receded, replaced by a white-hot, righteous fury that burned away all fear, all hesitation. Her eyes, when she looked at Elias, blazed with an unshakable, almost terrifying resolve. "You tell Julian Thorne, Elias," she declared, her voice ringing with the indomitable strength of generations of Sterlings, "that if he truly wishes to wage this kind of unholy war, if he truly dares to drag my pregnancy, my grief, my child through the mud simply to protect his ill-gotten gains, then he will discover exactly how far a Sterling will go to protect her own. I will not flinch, I will not break, and I will see him ruined." Seraphina, however, knew that legal maneuvers alone might not be enough against a man as ruthless and well-connected as Julian Thorne. She remembered her father, Augustus, speaking of the intricate, often invisible, network of influence he had cultivated over decades, not just in business, but in media, in politics, in every echelon of Aethelburg society. People who had respected Augustus Sterling not merely for his immense wealth, but for his unwavering integrity, his quiet philanthropy, his loyalty. It was time to call upon those alliances. She made a series of discreet but profoundly impactful phone calls. One was to Diana Crane, a renowned Pulitzer finalist investigative journalist at the Aethelburg Chronicle, a woman known for her fearless takedowns of corrupt corporate Goliaths, and someone who had always held Augustus Sterling in the highest regard for his significant contributions to medical research. Another call went to Senator Alastair Finch, a powerful and respected political figure, a longtime Sterling family ally whose early campaigns Augustus had quietly and generously supported. Within days, the tide began to turn. A scathing, though elegantly worded and meticulously researched, op-ed appeared in the Aethelburg Chronicle under Diana Crane's byline. It didn't name Julian Thorne directly, but the devastatingly accurate description of a prominent Aethelburg financier attempting to leverage an unborn child and his grieving pregnant wife's alleged mental instability in a high-stakes hostile divorce settlement was utterly unmistakable. The public, already disgusted by Julian and Isabelle's brazen, almost gleeful, public spectacle, overwhelmingly and vociferously sided with Seraphina, the dignified, wronged, pregnant Sterling heiress. Public sentiment, fanned by Diana Crane's powerful piece and the subsequent whispers from Senator Finch's influential circle, turned virulently against Julian Thorne. Investors in Thorne Dominion Capital, already nervous about the stability of a company whose founder was embroiled in such a messy public scandal, began to make anxious inquiries. The carefully constructed edifice of Julian Thorne's reputation was beginning to crumble. Meanwhile, Clara Vance, Seraphina's ever-resourceful cousin, had been conducting her own discreet investigation into Isabelle Devereux's shadowy past. Using her own surprisingly extensive network, connections forged perhaps from a side of the Vance family less concerned with societal niceties, or from her own previous, less conventional career path, Clara uncovered a disturbing pattern. Isabelle Devereux, it seemed, had a history of attaching herself to powerful, usually older, and often married men. She would leverage their influence, bleed them dry of resources and connections, and then, when their fortunes inevitably waned or a more promising, wealthier target appeared on her radar, she would discard them with ruthless efficiency. There were even hushed whispers of past scandals quickly buried. Reputations inexplicably ruined, fortunes mysteriously lost. Clara compiled a damning dossier and presented it to Seraphina. "Izzy isn't just an opportunist, Sarah," Clara stated grimly, her eyes dark with concern. She's a predator, a professional. And there's more. There are persistent rumors, old family whispers on her mother's side, that her grandfather's once promising import-export business was utterly destroyed decades ago in a series of brutal corporate maneuvers orchestrated by none other than Augustus Sterling. Seraphina stared at Clara, the implication of her words hanging heavy in the air. An old family grudge? A vendetta passed down through generations? Could Isabelle's pursuit of Julian, her blatant attempt to dismantle the Sterling legacy, be more than just avarice and ambition? Could it be a long-planned, deeply personal revenge? The thought sent a fresh chill down Seraphina's spine. This wasn't just a battle against Julian anymore. This was a war against a far more insidious and perhaps far more dangerous enemy. Julian Thorne, increasingly agitated by the relentless negative press, the growing unease amongst his investors, and Victoria Rexford's increasingly pessimistic legal assessments, attempted to mount a public relations defense. It backfired. Spectacularly. The tabloids, fueled by anonymous leaks, perhaps from Diana Crane's sources, or even from disgruntled former associates of Isabelle Devereux unearthed by Clara's digging, replayed endlessly damaging footage of him and Isabelle at exclusive parties, their callous disregard for appearances further cementing the public's perception of him as a heartless, self-absorbed narcissist. In a last-ditch, desperate effort, his carefully constructed world visibly teetering on the brink of collapse, Julian Thorne made a late-night phone call directly to Seraphina at the Oakhaven estate. His voice when she answered was almost unrecognizable. Subdued, stripped of its customary arrogance, carrying a faint, desperate echo of the man she had once, however misguidedly, believed she loved. "Seraphina," he began, his voice a low murmur. "Seraphina, this has all gotten completely out of hand." A long pause. I'm willing to negotiate, privately. Just you and me. No lawyers, no press. Our old lake house at Oakhaven, noon tomorrow." Seraphina listened, her heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Could this be genuine? A moment of clarity? Or just another manipulative ploy from a desperate man? She thought of her father's unwavering foresight, the strength embedded in that damning clause. She thought of her unborn child, the innocent life caught in this maelstrom. She thought of her vow. "Fine, Julian," she finally agreed, her voice cold and steady. "I'll meet you." But then she delivered her own chilling ultimatum. "But understand this, Julian Thorne. If I even sense for a moment that you are playing me, if this is yet another one of your elaborate, deceitful games, I will not hold back. I will bring you Thorne Dominion Capital and every single thing you have built upon my family's money and my father's good name crashing down around your ears." Clause or no clause, are we understood? There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line, then a faint, almost contrite murmur. Understood. As Seraphina hung up the phone, she felt her heart quake. The Oakhaven Lake House. Once their sanctuary, a place of whispered secrets and shared dreams. Now it was to be the stage for what could very well be their final, fateful confrontation. One last chance for a resolution without total annihilation. Or the battlefield where she would unleash every last weapon in her formidable arsenal. She clutched the antique silver locket, its hidden key a silent promise of the power she now wielded. The game was far from over. In fact, the most dangerous move was yet to be played. The Oakhaven Lake House. Once, it had been their sanctuary, a rustic chic retreat filled with the scent of pine, crackling fireplaces, and whispered promises under star-strewn skies. Now, as Seraphina Vale drove up the winding gravel driveway, the sky above a bruised, oppressive gray, the property felt alien, desolate. A silent, decaying monument to a love that had curdled into something toxic and unrecognizable. The game, she knew, was far from over. In fact, the most dangerous and perhaps most defining move was yet to be played within these very walls. Julian Thorne was already there, standing by the large bay window that overlooked the still, slate-gray waters of the lake. He looked diminished. The usual arrogant swagger, the almost palpable aura of power that always surrounded him, was noticeably absent. He seemed tired, worn, the sharp lines of his bespoke suit somehow unable to conceal the sag of his shoulders, the dark circles under his eyes hinting at countless sleepless nights. He turned as Seraphina entered, a flicker of something unrateable, relief, apprehension, in his gaze. He gestured towards a faded chintz sofa near the cavernous, cold stone fireplace, its embers long dead. "Seraphina, thank you for coming." His voice was subdued, stripped of its usual confident timbre. She inclined her head, settling into the seat, a place where years ago, in a different lifetime it seemed, they had once cuddled on lazy Sunday afternoons, dreaming of a future that now felt like a cruel mirage. He remained standing, arms crossed, as if needing the slight advantage of elevation for the difficult conversation to come. "I hope," he began, his gaze fixed on a distant point across the lake. "I sincerely hope we can resolve this entire unfortunate situation, without any more public spectacle." Seraphina's voice, when she replied, was quiet, yet it carried the sharp, cutting edge of a razor. "And whose fault, Julian, is that spectacle? The one you so masterfully orchestrated on the courthouse steps?" He flinched, then met her gaze, his jaw tight. "I acknowledge, I am not blameless in this, Seraphina. I know that. But you're not exactly making things easy, are you? This relentless pursuit, it's destructive." "My pursuit is destructive?" she echoed, a single eyebrow arching in disbelief. "Or is it merely a consequence of your own devastating choices, Julian?" He shifted uncomfortably, then cleared his throat, moving towards a small, antique table where a sleek leather folder lay. "I called you here, Seraphina, because I want to propose an agreement, a final settlement." He picked up the folder, his hand surprisingly unsteady, and handed it to her. "We settle this here now, out of court, cleanly." Seraphina opened the folder. Inside, typed on crisp, expensive stationery, was Julian Thorne's offer. It was, by any objective measure, substantial. A staggering lump sum payment that would ensure her financial independence for lifetimes. Generous, ongoing child support, meticulously detailed. Title to the grand Sterling family estate in Newbury Haven, free and clear. And in return, a single, all-encompassing stipulation. She, Seraphina Vale, née Sterling, would relinquish any and all claims to Thorne Dominion Capital, any share of its assets or profits, and, most critically, she would agree to permanently and irrevocably waive any potential enforcement of the breach of trust and moral integrity clause meticulously drafted by her late father, Augustus Sterling. He would, in turn, formally waive any and all claims to custody of their unborn child, now and in the future. She scanned the typed lines, her expression unreadable. The numbers were, indeed, astronomical. Enough to silence most, to buy acquiescence from almost anyone. But Seraphina saw beyond the figures. She saw Julian, her husband, the father of her child, attempting to buy his way out of accountability, to erase his betrayals, his public humiliations, with a sufficiently large check. She thought of Clara's chilling intel, the whispers of Isabelle Devereux's deep-seated, generational vendetta against the Sterling family, a vendetta Julian might be an unwitting pawn in, or worse, a willing accomplice. Did Isabelle's poison run so deep that this settlement was merely another move in her long game? Or was Julian simply a desperate man trying to salvage the wreckage of his own making? And in the end, did it even matter which it was? The insult was the same. The disrespect to her father's memory, to the very principles he had lived by, was equally profound. She closed the folder softly, placing it on the worn wooden table between them. Her voice, when she spoke, was no longer tinged with sorrow, but with a calm, unshakable certainty. "Julian," she began, her gaze meeting his directly, "you still don't understand, do you? After all this, you still believe this is merely about money, or even about your company?" She shook her head, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. "This was never just about me, or my hurt feelings, as you so callously put it. This is about preserving my father's intentions, Julian. His honor, his legacy. He trusted you. He believed you were worthy of partnering with the Sterling name, of safeguarding what he had spent a lifetime building. And you shattered that trust. Publicly. Shamelessly. Brutally. If I sign this," she gestured towards the folder, "I'm effectively saying that his foresight, his principles, his meticulous efforts to protect his family and his legacy meant absolutely nothing. I am letting you off the hook for everything. And Julian, I simply cannot, I will not do that." A flash of his old, familiar frustration, the impatience of a man unaccustomed to being defied, crossed Julian's face. "And what good, precisely, does humiliating me further in court, dragging Thorne Dominion, our company, through the mud, achieve for anyone, Seraphina? Think of our child. What kind of environment are you creating?" He tried a different tack, his voice softening, attempting a note of wheedling intimacy. There was something real between us. Wasn't there, Sarah? In the beginning? Doesn't that shared past, those memories, count for anything at all? Her eyes misted over, a fleeting shadow of the love she had once believed in, the dreams she had once cherished, clouding her vision. But then her resolve, hard-won and diamond-strong, returned. It meant everything, Julian, she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. It meant the world, until you systematically, deliberately threw it all away, until you made it mean absolutely nothing. Her voice hardened. I am not the one who paraded a mistress around Aethelburg while my pregnant wife was grieving her father. I am not the one who threatened to blackmail me with custody of my own unborn child. And I am certainly not the one who then tried to buy my silence, my complicity, with a large enough check. You ask me what story our child will know of their father someday, Julian? I ask you, what kind of story are you giving me to tell them? Julian Thorne, for once in his life, was left utterly speechless. He stared at her, a flicker of genuine pain, or perhaps just profound, uncomprehending defeat, in his tired eyes. He mumbled something incoherent about his own difficult upbringing, the intoxicating, corrupting allure of power, a pathetic, last-ditch attempt at an excuse, at eliciting some form of sympathy she no longer possessed. Seraphina rose from the sofa, the folder containing his offer still on the table between them, untouched, rejected. She looked at him, the man she had once loved, the man who had become a stranger, a monster of his own making. And in that moment, she felt not hatred, not even anger, but a vast, echoing emptiness, a profound pity for the broken, morally bankrupt creature he had allowed himself to become. I will not sign your papers, Julian, she stated, her voice calm, final. We will see this through, in court. Let the world see the truth. She decided then. She would fight, not for spite, not even solely for revenge, but for principle, for her child's future, for the sacred honor of the Sterling name, and for the memory of Augustus Sterling, the father who had loved her enough to try and protect her, even from beyond the grave. The scene shifted, inevitably, inexorably, to the hallowed, intimidating halls of the Aethelburg Grand Judiciary. The divorce trial, Thorne versus Thorne, née Sterling, became the media event of the year, a courtroom drama for the ages. Reporters from across the globe, financial analysts, society vultures, all crowded the ornate courtroom, hungry for every salacious detail, every damning revelation. Seraphina, now nearly 6 months pregnant, her condition a visible testament to Julian's callousness, entered the courtroom each day with a quiet, unshakable dignity, her head held high, Elias Vance and a fiercely supportive Clara Vance constantly at her side. Julian, too, made his daily entrance, Isabelle Devereux still, almost defiantly, clinging to his arm, though her trademark smugness now seemed a little strained around the edges, her eyes holding a new, unfamiliar hint of brittleness. He attempted to project an air of unruffled confidence, but the deepening dark circles under his eyes, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hand as he adjusted his tie, betrayed the immense, crushing pressure he was under. The trial was a brutal, public evisceration. Elias Vance, in his masterful opening statement, painted a devastating picture. The sanctity of the Sterling-Thorne partnership, an alliance built upon Augustus Sterling's deep, personal trust and Seraphina's own earnest belief in a shared future. He then meticulously, damningly, laid out how Julian Thorne's egregious, shockingly public moral failings, his blatant and repeated breaches of contract, the sordid affair with Isabelle Devereux, the calculated public humiliation of his pregnant wife, the despicable custody threats had irrevocably triggered Augustus Sterling's carefully crafted breach of trust clause. He presented the irrefutable evidence, the photographs, the receipts, the witness statements, the damning op-ed in the Aethelburg Chronicle. Victoria Rexford, Julian's high-powered, notoriously aggressive lawyer, fought back with everything she had. She argued passionately, if somewhat desperately, that personal moral failings, however distasteful, were utterly irrelevant in the context of complex corporate agreements. She attempted to dismiss Augustus Sterling's meticulously worded clause as an anachronistic, legally unenforceable relic of a bygone era, an emotional outburst rather than a binding contractual stipulation. She tried, with all her considerable skill, to paint Seraphina as a vindictive, emotionally overwrought woman, scorned and seeking to destroy her husband out of pure spite. But the evidence and the tide of public opinion was overwhelmingly against them. Witnesses, some reluctant, some surprisingly eager, perhaps former associates of Julian's with their own scores to settle, unearthed by Clara's tireless digging, painted a damning portrait of Julian Thorne as a man increasingly corrupted by his own insatiable ambition. A man easily manipulated by the cunning and equally ambitious Isabelle Devereux. The climax arrived on a tense, hushed afternoon. The courtroom was packed to the rafters, silent with a breathless anticipation. Judge Alistair Munro, a stern, highly respected jurist, known for his incisive intellect, his profound understanding of complex financial law, and his absolute intolerance for courtroom theatrics or moral ambiguity, entered the chamber. He cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping slowly, deliberately, over the packed courtroom, lingering for a moment on Julian Thorne, then on Seraphina Vale. "This court," Judge Munro began, his voice firm, resonant, carrying to every corner of the silent room, "has carefully considered all evidence presented, all testimonies given, all legal arguments made by both esteemed counsels." He paused, the silence stretching, becoming almost unbearable. The sanctity of contracts, particularly those agreements that explicitly, and with such foresight, delineate conditions of trust, ethical conduct, and personal integrity, especially when vast family legacies and significant public reputations are intrinsically involved, must be upheld. His gaze, like a steel rapier, fixed on Julian Thorne. The language of the late Augustus Sterling's private codicils and stipulations regarding the Sterling-Thorne Capital Partnership Agreement is unequivocal. The documented, and indeed, flagrantly public behavior of Mr. Julian Thorne constitutes a clear, undeniable, and frankly, egregious violation of said breach of trust and moral integrity clause. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously. Julian Thorne's face, already pale, turned a ghastly ashen gray. He looked, in that moment, utterly broken, a puppet whose strings had been violently, irrevocably cut. Isabelle Devereux stared in stunned, frozen disbelief, her perfectly made-up face contorting into an ugly mask of raw fury and dawning panic. Judge Alistair Munro's gavel fell, the sound sharp, definitive, echoing through the grand chamber like the crack of doom. "Therefore, this court finds overwhelmingly in favor of the plaintiff, Mrs. Seraphina Vale, née Sterling. The breach of trust clause stands. Mr. Thorne is hereby ordered to repay, in full, all Sterling family investments in Thorne Dominion Capital, inclusive of all accrued profits and derived assets, to the Sterling estate. This order is effective immediately." It was done. Justice, swift and brutal, had been served. Seraphina, her hand resting protectively on the gentle swell of her unborn child, closed her eyes for a brief moment, a silent prayer of thanks to her father, to the universe, perhaps even to the strength she hadn't known she possessed. Then she rose, her head held high, her composure absolute, and flanked by a triumphant Elias Vance and a beaming, tearful Clara, walked with quiet dignity out of the Aethelburg Grand Judiciary Hall. She walked into a blinding barrage of flashbulbs, into the cacophony of shouted questions, but this time, the atmosphere felt different. It was less a predatory feeding frenzy, more a stunned, almost awed acknowledgement of her incredible, hard-won victory. A queen had indeed risen. The news hit the financial markets of Aethelburg, and indeed the world, like a seismic shockwave. Thorne Dominion Capital, once a symbol of Julian Thorne's Midas touch, his invincibility, began to hemorrhage value. Investors, already deeply unsettled by the weeks of scandalous headlines, fled in droves. Stock prices plummeted, credit lines were withdrawn. Within hours, the company was in freefall. By the end of the day, Thorne Dominion Capital, the glittering empire built on ambition, betrayal, and sterling money, had effectively ceased to exist. It had crumbled to dust. That evening, in the opulent, panoramic-view Aethelburg penthouse that Julian had so arrogantly purchased for his mistress, now a cold, sterile monument to his catastrophic folly, Isabelle Devereux delivered her own, typically unsentimental, final judgment. Her expensive designer suitcases were already packed, lined up neatly by the door. "Well, Julian," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth, any sympathy, as she surveyed the lavish surroundings with a cool, appraising, and ultimately dismissive eye. "It would appear your particular brand of Thorne magic has rather spectacularly run out." Julian, slumped on a ridiculously expensive Italian sofa, looking like a man who had aged a decade in a single afternoon, could only manage a broken whisper. Izzy, don't, please. We can rebuild. There are other assets, offshore accounts. Isabelle Devereux let out a short, sharp, utterly contemptuous laugh. Rebuild, darling? With what, precisely? Your once dazzling charm? Your now tarnished reputation? She picked up her diamond-encrusted clutch. My sympathies, Julian, truly. But I am, above all else, a pragmatist. And you, my dear, are no longer a viable asset. In fact, she paused, delivering the final killing blow with a chillingly sweet smile, you're no use to me now, or I suspect, to anyone else in this city. And with that, Isabelle Devereux, the serpent who had slithered so effectively into the heart of his kingdom, turned, her crimson dress a defiant slash of color against the bleak, gathering twilight of his utter ruin, and walked out of his life without a single backward glance. Julian Thorne was left utterly alone, in the echoing, mocking emptiness of his self-made prison, the glittering, indifferent city lights of Aethelburg twinkling far below his panoramic windows like the cold, distant stars, each one a silent testament to his spectacular and exquisitely deserved downfall. He had lost everything, his empire, his mistress, his reputation, his wife, his child, everything. The Aethelburg Grand Judiciary Hall had fallen silent, the echo of Judge Alistair Munro's gavel a definitive full stop to Julian Thorne's reign of arrogance and deceit. Julian Thorne, the man who had everything, the master of the universe, was left utterly alone in the cavernous, opulent penthouse he'd bought for his mistress, the glittering city lights of Aethelburg now seeming to mock his spectacular self-inflicted downfall. He had lost it all. His empire, a house of cards built on sterling money and moral bankruptcy, had crumbled to dust. His mistress, the venomous Isabelle Devereux, had vanished like a phantom at the first sign of his financial ruin. His reputation was in tatters, a cautionary tale whispered in the very high society circles he once dominated. His wife, the woman he had so callously betrayed, was now his victor, and his child, the innocent life he had so callously dismissed, would never truly know him as a father. Everything gone. But what of Seraphina? What becomes of the queen when the tyrant is deposed? They say revenge is a dish best served cold. For Seraphina Vale, née Sterling, it wasn't about the coldness of revenge, but about the warmth of a future meticulously rebuilt, a precious legacy honored, and a new life that blossomed with quiet strength from the toxic ashes of betrayal. Her victory in court proved, with resounding clarity, that true enduring power isn't found in what you own, the empires you build, or the people you crush, but in what you stand for, the integrity you defend. And Seraphina stood for everything Julian Thorne had ultimately despised: honor, loyalty, and a quiet, unshakable resilience. Months later, far from the unforgiving glare and poisonous gossip of Aethelburg, Seraphina found her sanctuary. She returned to Newbury Haven, to the sprawling, historic Stirling estate, a place imbued with the enduring spirit of her father Augustus. It was there, amidst the familiar comfort of ancestral gardens and rooms filled with generations of Stirling memories, that she gave birth to her daughter. She named her Lyra Aurora Vale. Lyra for the celestial constellation, a symbol of harmony and beauty. Aurora for the dawn of her new beginning. Her new life was a portrait of quiet serenity, a stark, healing contrast to the relentless chaos and emotional turmoil of her years with Julian. Her primary focus, her entire world, became Lyra, a beautiful, healthy baby girl with her mother's luminous eyes and, Seraphina prayed, her grandfather's indomitable spirit. But beyond the profound joys of motherhood, Seraphina also embraced her role as the custodian of the Stirling legacy. Guided by the wise, steadfast counsel of Elias Vance, who had become more than just her lawyer, but a trusted mentor, and with the unwavering, fiercely loyal support of her cousin Clara, Seraphina took a more direct, hands-on role in the leadership of Stirling Legacy Pharmaceuticals and the broader Stirling Corp. She championed a new era of ethical business practices, a conscious and deliberate counterpoint to Julian Thorne's ruthless, win-at-all-costs methodology that had ultimately proven so self-destructive. The vast fortune reclaimed from the wreckage of Thorne Dominion Capital was not hoarded, nor was it ostentatiously displayed. Instead, under Seraphina's thoughtful stewardship, it was put to work. What do you imagine she did with such power, such responsibility? Would she let the bitterness of the past consume her, or would she forge something truly meaningful? A significant portion of the reclaimed funds was used to establish the Augustus Sterling Foundation for Ethical Enterprise and Women's Empowerment. Its mission was twofold: to provide seed capital and mentorship for innovative businesses built upon a bedrock of integrity and sustainable practices, and, perhaps even more personally for Seraphina, to create robust support systems and opportunities for women overcoming adversity, particularly those who had been impacted by financial coercion or emotional abuse in high-stakes, high-pressure environments. It was her way of transforming her own pain, her own public ordeal, into a powerful, positive force for good in the world. It was her way of truly honoring her father's multifaceted legacy, a legacy that extended far beyond mere wealth and corporate success. The antique silver locket, the one that had held the tiny, unassuming key to her liberation, became an even more potent symbol for Seraphina. She wore it always, a constant, tangible reminder of her father's enduring love, his extraordinary foresight, and just as importantly, of her own hard-won resilience, her capacity to rise from the ashes. It was an heirloom she planned to pass to Lyra one day, not merely as a piece of beautiful jewelry, but as a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, a reminder of the importance of hidden wisdom and the quiet power of integrity in a world too often seduced by avarice and ambition. And what of Julian Thorne, the fallen tycoon? His name, once synonymous with financial wizardry and ruthless power, faded into obscurity. He vanished from the glittering Aethelburg social scene, from the boardrooms where he once held sway. Whispers occasionally surfaced, of course, as they always do in high society. He became a cautionary tale, a specter invoked to warn ambitious young men of the perils of hubris and betrayal. Some said he attempted to rebuild his shattered fortune, to launch new, audacious ventures in far-flung, less discerning international markets. But without the solid foundation of sterling capital, without his once golden, now irrevocably tarnished reputation, he found only a succession of humiliating failures, each one driving him further into the shadows of anonymity and irrelevance. Did he ever truly learn from his spectacular downfall? Or was he destined to forever chase the ghosts of his former glory, a broken man haunted by the empire he had so casually destroyed? One can only speculate. Isabelle Devereux, true to her predatory, chameleon-like nature, also vanished from the Aethelburg landscape as soon as Julian Thorne's financial ruin was complete and irrefutable. Her loyalty, it turned out, was directly proportional to her benefactor's net worth. Rumors, more concrete this time, occasionally trickled back through the international grapevine. Isabelle had resurfaced in Monaco or perhaps Dubai, already skillfully attached to another wealthy, powerful, and usually conveniently married man. She was always seeking her next target, her next conquest. Her deep-seated generational vendetta against the Sterlings, if Clara's intel had been accurate, was perhaps sated by the sheer totality of Julian's destruction. Or perhaps, more chillingly, it was merely dormant, waiting for another opportunity, another lifetime, to strike again. Her story was a stark reminder of the fleeting parasitic nature of success, built upon the ruin of others. In the quiet, sun-drenched gardens of the Newbury Haven estate, years later, Seraphina Vale, no longer the broken victim but a woman of immense grace, strength, and quiet authority, would often sit with Lyra Aurora, now a bright, inquisitive young girl. She would watch her daughter play, her laughter echoing through the ancient trees, and a profound sense of peace would settle over her. The scars of Julian's betrayal, though they would never entirely fade, no longer defined her. They had instead forged her. She was not a vengeful victor, gloating over the ashes of her former husband's life. She was a resilient survivor, a mother, a leader, a philanthropist, a woman who had reclaimed not just her family's fortune, but her own power, her own voice, her own unshakable identity. She had fought for justice, not merely for revenge, and in doing so, she had protected her heritage and secured a future filled with promise for her daughter. One evening, as a soft New England twilight painted the sky in hues of rose and lavender, Seraphina sat in her father's study, now her study, Lyra asleep in a nearby bassinet, the gentle rhythm of her breathing a soothing counterpoint to the crackling fire in the hearth. She opened her own journal, the antique silver locket gleaming softly at her throat in the firelight. She picked up her pen and wrote, "They say empires are built on ambition and power." Julian certainly believed that. He built his, and he saw it turn to dust. Because empires built on deceit, on betrayal, on the wreckage of other people's trust, are ultimately built on sand. Wealth, however vast, can vanish in an instant. Towers of influence, however high they may reach, can crumble overnight. But honor, once defended, once fiercely reclaimed from the very ashes of despair, that, my dearest Lyra, is a treasure that shines brighter and endures far longer than any fleeting worldly fortune. This, my precious daughter, this integrity, this resilience, this unwavering commitment to what is right and true, this is the true sterling legacy I will pass on to you. And as she looked towards the window, towards the hopeful light of a new day dawning, Seraphina Vale smiled, a genuine, contented smile. The queen had indeed risen, and her reign, built on strength, integrity, and love, was just beginning. Dear friend, life, as the Stoics teach us, doesn't break us with thunderclaps. It tests us with steady pressure until we either crack or forge ourselves into something unbreakable. Seraphina's journey wasn't just about betrayal or loss. It was about discovering a power she didn't know she had. In her darkest hour, she found clarity. In heartbreak, she found courage. She was stripped of illusions, only to inherit something far greater: her father's quiet wisdom, her own unshakable resolve, and the fierce will to protect what truly mattered. The storm she faced didn't destroy her. It revealed her. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us, that sometimes the hardest moments are the ones that carve us into who we were always meant to be. When the world underestimates you, remember, your next move can be your most powerful. If Seraphina's story moved you, please consider giving this video a like, sharing it with a friend, and subscribing for more powerful stories that remind us of our strength.